when those cables go down, IT communications are lost for mass chunks of a population. The war in Ukraine was not like anything I'd ever experienced before. The cyber attacks were a huge precursor, and that wasn't just in Ukraine. That was in other European countries as well. Well, I think we're seeing the consequences for not acting.
Welcome to the Siren Investigates podcast, the podcast that discusses trends in investigation technology. I'm delighted today to be joined by Andrew Borene.
Thanks for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate the effort you made to get to Galway to come to join us on the Siren Investigates podcast. Just by way of introduction, Andrew has a great resume and somebody we're really excited to talk to today about all things national security, cybersecurity, etc. So Andrew is the executive director and global security lead at Flashpoint, a leader in threat intelligence. He's a board member at the Special Operations Association of America, board member at the European Marshall Center and Partnership for Peace. He's a recognized expert in national security, been featured on CNN, CNBC, NBC, CBS and Fox Business. Also has had his opinion featured in Wall Street Journal, the BBC, The Economist, New York Times and USA Today. Worked in the office of the Director of National Intelligence in the US, the Deputy General Counsel at the Pentagon, US Marine Corps Military Intelligence, was the CEO of a publicly listed cybersecurity company and had senior roles at IBM, Symantec and LexisNexis. So, Andrew, did I leave anything out there?
No, but I think with an introduction like that, you can be my hype man anytime.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
new job.
Yeah, and it's okay. Some of the titles are actually longer, which means they're less important than you gave them. So, but I do appreciate it.
We'll take your interpretation. So, where I'd like to start, Andrew, is just take us back. How did you get into this world? How does somebody, build up a resume and an expertise like that? Where did it all start? And just take us through a little bit of that journey.
Well, I'm just going to start with some of the best advice I got early on, which was don't worry about where you make the money. Worry about doing things you really are passionate about and that make you that answer kind of the calling of your soul. And before 9/11, I had been working in an investment bank at Wells Fargo, and I actually got kind of a little bored doing finance. And so I thought about what would I do next. And again, before 9/11, it seemed like if you wanted to get really far forward, work with international partners. I grew up kind of in a multinational environment. I spent some time in the UK growing up. My father was an immigration attorney, and I knew I wanted to do international things that helped people, and I didn't know what it was. So I applied to the U.S. Peace Corps, the U.S. Marine Corps, and U.S. intelligence agencies. And it just turned out the Marine Corps answered first. And in the course of my time in the Marines, 9/11 happened. I was part of the invasion of Iraq and saw kind of the first 100 days of major combat operations there. And I got kind of caught by a bug of the gray zone in between conventional large-scale conflict or war and peace. And today it gets referred to a lot as hybrid threats and hybrid warfare. So, it sounds like when you look at my resume, it's been very itinerant. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I didn't. A lot of times it's been a little scary in between jobs, but I just love working at that intersection of public safety and government and defending values like human rights, international cooperation, and democratic principles.
Fantastic. And when we're here in Ireland, I know you had some early involvement in our local peace process here. Can you talk about that, whatever you can tell us?
100%. And I won't, I wasn't part of the peace process.
Sure, yeah.
I was,
yeah.
But after the Good Friday Agreement and Accords, the U.S. State Department selected some emerging U.S. leaders. This was, I guess, about 2009, 2010 timeframe. And so I had the opportunity. I got selected during my time at the Pentagon to come with the delegation and learn about the peace process. And I thought that it really opened up a thing for me about peace building, right? So I had been studying hybrid warfare and terrorism and counterterrorism and how do you do counter-espionage. But that was really, really eye-opening for me, how incredible the peace process was and how important former combatants were in building that peace. And so I think I actually kind of nerded out and learned a great deal about the history of that conflict, that it's not, decades old, it's hundreds of years old. And that both sides of that, you can say both sides, all sides, everybody in Northern Ireland was impacted by a very traumatic time that included criminal activity, included subversion, included all kinds of challenges. But what I liked about it is it was a really eye-opening about ways that you can bring people together with transparency about the past and building a shared hope for the future. So I kind of fell in love with Northern Ireland because you have great people who all want a better future. And seeing the Republic of Ireland government and the British government and the U.S. government and commercial groups on all sides and youth groups working to build that community, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned for the whole rest of the world.
It was a fabulous collaboration right across that community. Yeah, no doubt. And more recently, then you were telling me yesterday you spent some time in Ukraine the last 12 months.
So I've been to Ukraine twice in the last year. First, I went to Lviv for a cybersecurity conference, and then the second time I was in Kyiv during another cyber defense conference. I guess my takeaway on Ukraine is that I have been parts of a conventional conflict. I've seen some conflict zones in person, but I have to say that the war in Ukraine was not like anything I'd ever experienced before. In all, I don't want to use that buzzword again, but in all ways, it is a hybrid conflict. It involves cyber attacks. It involves attacks on, the public's cognition and how they're interpreting events in real time. It involved deepfakes in the very first weeks when there was a deepfake of President Zelensky that said that he was surrendering, which was not true, and then was rebuffed by fact-finding and then also a kind of a live stream from some senior leadership. But in many ways, Ukraine to me, and I wasn't alive during the Blitz, but I got the impression that maybe that's kind of what it felt like to be in London or preoccupied countries under attack before conventional warfare began.
Right. And so that's interesting that, you contrast the Blitz, which was all about conventional warfare. Now you're saying, if you just watch the news, you think of Ukraine as conventional warfare, but you're saying it's much more than that. It's much more of a hybrid battle space today.
Absolutely. And you, again, going back in looking forensically, we kind of see these things, but there were precursor attacks. There was precursor activity that the Russian government and proxies through things like the Prigozhin network, used to be known as Wagner Group, activities meant to kind of co-opt populations into believing certain things, put presence on the ground. The cyber attacks were a huge precursor, and that wasn't just in Ukraine. That was in other European countries as well. And so I think that is another aspect of it. And then the other thing is, I think a lot of folks get confused because they see that the Russians are launching drones or they're launching missiles, and they assume, those are high precision weapons, and that they're attacking kind of known targets that would be, but they're not. In many ways, they launch, a couple dozen drones. 80 to 90% of them get defeated by air defense, and then a handful get through. And tragically, when I was there, the residential complex was hit and killed a couple people in Lviv. That's really far west. That's almost Poland. And in Kyiv, during the morning of the conference, a hypersonic missile was launched that landed, just a very short distance from government center. But again, I don't believe that those are targeted at specific infrastructure. They're meant to affect the population and try to break their will to fight or their will to resist, and that makes a very different conflict than others I have seen personally.
Wow. And Andrew, today we're going to talk about Europe and, the impact of, whether it's war in Ukraine, whether it's, threats out there. What do you see of your experience? And you spend a lot of time in Europe now, concentrating on Europe's, ability to respond to change in the market, whether it's changes around NATO, whether it's, Sweden and Finland quickly, joining NATO after many years being independent. Just talk to me about what you've seen over the last 5 years, given your experience in this world, to see, are you surprised at the pace of change? Who saw this coming in terms of changes like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one. I mean, talk about gray rhinos and black swans in risk, right? Gray rhinos you see coming. There's a dust cloud. People are aware of it. Black swans are things that we just don't anticipate emerging. And so I think there's a lot of black swans. And I would say even in the last 3 years, since the initial buildup and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I'm not sure that the European assessment was that the Russians would actually launch a full-scale invasion. I think they thought that they would kind of hold up at the 2014 annexation line. And so clearly that put a lot of pressure on non-NATO members to want that common defense Article 5 protection. And I think in many ways that you can directly attribute the accession of Sweden and Finland into NATO from previously non-aligned to that flashpoint of the Russians invading Ukraine on a full-scale basis.
Yeah. And then in terms of what you've seen around things like a common operating picture that Europe needs to integrate themselves and better manage their own security going forward. Have you seen that? When you've got a bigger NATO, when you've got more of a focus, obviously there's more investment being announced almost on a daily basis. In Europe. What do you see as the big challenges that Europe has to overcome?
So I mean, I think again we see this in just really rapid real time. And, for many, many years, many U.S. presidential administrations have been calling, for both Democrat and Republican, calling for increased investment by other NATO member states into the alliance in the form of percentage of GDP math. And I think something happened that was important in the last year, which is you see this emergence of what UK's Prime Minister Starmer calls a coalition of the willing. You see leaders in France. It's the populations of these countries. It's not just their leaders saying, hey, we've got to do something so that we can be more independent and less dependent or reliant on a single global superpower. And so I think that it actually becomes healthy. And we just saw a few weeks ago the announcement of this in U.S. dollars, $850 billion plus. I think it was an 800 billion euro package that was agreed to at the European community level. And so that's at the executive. Now it has to go through a federation response, all the member states. But the pace at which that is being adopted, I think is really important. And it will, if it's done in a way where all of those individual member states, and not just NATO, but European states, can develop interoperability in the capabilities, can develop you talked about a common operating picture. That's all threats, all hazards, common operating picture, right? Things can disrupt critical infrastructure that are not, sabotage or subversion, right? Or proxy warfare. It can be a natural hazard. It can be a fire at a substation that was naturally occurring. And so having a common operating picture where there are all these really big interdependencies, I think is critical, especially when, in my observation of the European system, is that European nations are very proud of their sovereignty. And it's not a united bloc the way that the United States is at the federal level. And so that willingness, I love that expression, coalition of the willing. That willingness to come to the table, share information with each other, build interoperable capabilities, those are going to be the hallmarks. And I think it creates a little bit of a pain point because obviously national industries frequently want to kind of advocate their own nation's solutions. But all in all, I think it's very positive development for the future security of Europe.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of announcements in the past weren't backed up by budgets, whereas when people actually turn up with, 850 billion, it's very material, so you kind of, we see that the urgency and the attitude has changed around these kind of threats that maybe wasn't there in the past.
Oh, 100%. And, money talks. I think there was an expression in a movie I saw once that thems that have the gold make the rules. And so I think when you see things like budget appropriations, authorizations, at that national level within the Federation, and you also see, further commitment to increase loan capacity, borrowing, because these are really large capital expenditures when you talk about trying to build an organic European defense industrial base. That means building up factories. That means building up IT workforces. You probably know this here at Siren. Developers, sec dev. That expertise doesn't come overnight. And so, yeah, some borrowing probably does make sense. And I think that, again, that's where we're starting. Like, that's a really significant muscle movement. It doesn't seem like it's just words.
Yeah, and as well, what we see in that is, when people make long-term commitments to that, you see industry invest as well long-term. So it's not just a government announcement; it's industry can follow that then with certainty around investment.
Yeah, and I think it's also shown. I mean, if you look at back to money, if you're looking at economic principles, European defense industrials are up, I think, more than 100% in the last 12 to 18 months. That means clearly investors are looking at it and they're hedging on the growth of an organic European defense capability and an increase in the deployment of these funds. And then, that'll absolutely start spurring independent research and development money by those companies because they know that there will probably be an endpoint where they can then develop revenue. So it's kind of like vaccine prevention, right? The crisis of COVID drove a lot of independent R&D for vaccine. It made a huge jump in how reverse RNA transcription works to develop vaccines in short order. I mean, this is almost a world-altering public health change. And in many ways, I think that at least in the European regional level, I think that is probably an apt analogy. There is a crisis happening in security and public safety. And so it's bringing people together, and we're seeing the investment happen.
And from our point of view, we see venture capital, private equity, all types of capital now interested in defense security, national security, whereas it maybe wasn't something that they wanted, 5-10 years ago was all SaaS. They wanted to invest in a HR system or a CRM system, but maybe not deep tech around this. So I think it's a very good thing for industry at large in Europe, and we see a lot of interest in catching up with the US lead in this kind of area.
Yep.
So on the whole cybersecurity side of it, if you look into the various threats you talked about the hybrid threats. Let's talk about cybersecurity in particular and what some people call the silent war, right?
Yeah.
Why is it silent, and what do you see happening? And is it as silent as it used to be?
Well, I would argue it's not that silent. I mean, things like SCADA attacks, the advent of Stuxnet, which disrupted the Iranian. Yeah, and I will. No, but so developing malware that actually disrupts a physical system in the real world, and in that case, Stuxnet accelerated the refining capacity for weapons grade uranium. I believe it was uranium or plutonium. One of those. I'm not a nuclear scientist, for the record, but it accelerated the spin rate so much that it broke centrifuges. Well, that's almost like a kinetic result of a digital attack. So it's not silent anymore. The other thing we're observing, for instance, at Flashpoint, there's a lot of digging into the deep and dark web and the criminal underground. We're seeing move from ransomware into outright data theft with the advent of InfoStealer malware. And then that data gets a whole other life after it's been stolen. We also see that the ransoms are no longer just about, hey, we'll stop DDoSing you. We will stop, we'll unlock your data, into just out and out what I would call extortion, right? In many ways, it's piracy. They steal it, we're going to hurt you, and then they make threats at second and third order in the chain where, because they have the data, proprietary data from a company, Target, they then have customer lists and supplier lists. And they start calling all the customers and suppliers, and they say, we're going to do this to you as well if you don't pressure the target to pay the ransom. And so I think that is back to that, convergence of digital, real world, and now we see it in geopolitics on the cyber front, where Russia repatriated in a prisoner swap 2 convicted felons of cybercrime in the United States. So these are really big changes, and again, all within the last 24 months.
Wow. So then if you think of cybersecurity, which was always in the big corporate, the job of IT and the CISO, when you're talking about, robbing data, extortion, physical security, VIP protection, it's a much broader issue now than just, my computer's locked up, isn't it?
100%. And again, large multinational enterprises, whether it's a company or a university system, and governments, obviously with agencies and departments have global footprint, you do see this need for a unified threat intelligence picture. and I'll bring out Rheinmetall, German defense industrial base, as part of the demonstration here. It was confirmed that the Russian government had planned to assassinate Mr. Paperger, who's the CEO. And information sharing from the U.S. to Germany led to disruption of that plot. But that's a physical attack. In the United States, the CEO of United Healthcare was murdered on the street. That was a wrong place, wrong time problem in many ways, and that's not traditionally the domain of cybersecurity or a security operations center that's looking for malware and vulnerabilities and potential exploits that could be used against them. So, to your point, increasingly what we see at multinational enterprises that we work with at Flashpoint is bringing together like the nerds in IT with the knuckle draggers with guns and badges and who run access controls and video cameras, with political risk experts on common floorboards. And so you kind of end up with these professional open source intelligence or professional threat intelligence centers. And again, new development probably in the last 24 months where I think I've seen a lot of interest and investment in that area.
Interesting. And given the divergence of backgrounds of those three groups, that must be fun seeing them come together.
I think it is. And in many ways, the history of 20 years of allied and coalition counterterrorism is a really good precedent for how that comes together, right? Not every country in an international task force or an international alliance wants to do the same things or even can, right? They bring different talents into the mix. So really that common floorboards model, all of the information can come in from out in the real world, unclassified, but then it can be digested and routed into a siloed channel. So with a unified threat intelligence center for a multinational enterprise, just say we'll get out of the defense base and say a really large medical technology company somewhere in Europe. They do need to be concerned about executive protection. They do need to be concerned about property and location protection, monitoring threats. If they have facilities, are they potentially being targeted by a specific protest group? If that's the case, can they then dig in real time and see, is that protest likely to escalate to violence? Are there agitators who are posting online someplace about what they want to do? I think that this is a trend, and it is because it's a pain point. How do you get them working together? And getting nerds together with the tough gals and guys together with kind of policy wonk types. We've seen it in counterterrorism, and I think now we're going to see it in cyber defense, and we're going to see it in executive protection and physical security and public safety, which is, in my mind, only a good thing.
Yeah. And common floorboards, I love that expression. We always use the expression a single pane of glass, but now you're talking about actually getting them, getting them into the same room. So where organizationally do these new units report into often, or is it a board level, CEO level engagement where this is just that kind of serious risk? It's really a risk problem at the top level, but where do you see it organizationally fitting in?
So I have seen it in multiple different locations. A lot of times, and I'll start with the private sector side, because the government side, it varies government to government. They're all structured differently, different authorities. Typically, those are within kind of an intelligence defense or cyber defense type location as the convening authority. Sometimes the Prime Minister's office or Chief Executive's office will have direct support in the form of like situation room or kind of that fused public safety. It could be weather hazards or other hazards and kind of defense hazards. So in the private sector, though, particularly in the U.S., because there are a lot of complex privacy laws and there are complex state-to-state jurisdiction, I have seen this emerging under the General Counsel's office. Frequently, I think because the General Counsel is perceived as is able to have attorney-client protected conversations with management. They also can kind of help navigate if there are tricky questions about data to ensure that there's compliance. Another place I have seen this start to emerge in some global financial services firms is within the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. And I think part of that is because the CISO historically, a lot of security acquisition comes through that office. So funding is routed that way for CapEx, for training and education, for staffing, for contractor augmentation. So they're used to that motion. So it's kind of like a program management CISO function. That's so CISO, general counsels, and then sometimes other large firms will actually have a chief security officer, right? So very, very large enterprises will have a chief security officer who's often responsible both for the inner tier senior executive protection and travel and planning, and risks to other property and people within the organization. And so that's another place it can live. But typically that CSO function hasn't had investment in things like cyber defense, or they're not buying threat intelligence services, they're not buying vulnerability patching, attack surface management solutions. So I think regardless of who owns the budget, who gets served by a unified threat intelligence platform or kind of an OSINT cell, it's multi-stakeholder. So it's kind of, I guess I'm agnostic personally about where they sit. But it's really important that it does start coming together.
Yeah, I think what we see in that world, which is fascinating to see, if somebody's from a cybersecurity background, they'll see everything through a cybersecurity lens. Like if you got a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And then you've got the physical people see it as a physical problem, the policy people see it as a policy problem. Yep. So you're just trying to knit them all together and understand other people's domains. And I think that's what we see happening at the moment. I presume the same with the Flashpoint conversations.
100%. Yeah, and again, I think it's we talk a lot about at Flashpoint. We use the word bespoke quite a bit because we do bespoke open source intelligence collection. We're a primary source collector on behalf of our customers. We're not just aggregating and scraping data. We're actually actively collecting and getting the right data to support decisions. And so, again, it needs to be bespoke on the organization's needs. If an organization has had a really robust cyber defense program and they've got a sophisticated SOC already stood up, then yeah, it probably makes sense to build it out of that cyber lens. On the other hand, an organization that is more focused on physical security because they have less digital assets and they're less worried about their online risk, it probably makes sense to start augmenting them with cyber defense and cyber expertise. But yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is, there are increasing threats, and they come from all fronts. They're attacking the private sector first, and if it's a natural disaster with private sector impact, they can't wait necessarily for the government to tell them what to do next. And so I think that it's increasingly, for multinational corporations, multinational entities, universities, research departments, et cetera, really critical that they have their own internal awareness on world events.
Super. Just changing a bit to very much a government domain, the maritime domain, particularly maritime protection. So often has been an overlooked issue, and particularly with a European perspective on it, cables, shipping, narcotics. Talk to me about what you're seeing there. And, I presume this is part of the hybrid warfare you're seeing out there.
100%. And here in Europe last fall, kind of November, December timeframe, there was a sea cable disruption. It appears that it may have been kind of due to an anchor dragging behind a vessel that was flying. I believe it was a Togo flag with a Chinese crew, and there's some suspicion around it. And again, I would argue it's irrelevant. It could have been an anchor from a suspicious ship, or it could have been a natural hazard for that disruption. When those cables go down, IT communications are lost for mass chunks of a population. If you see, you look at Heathrow last week, regardless of what caused the fire at the substation, London Heathrow was shut down for almost a full day. And that caused a huge ripple effect to the economic growth that's all of those people traveling. And fortunately that one was resolved quite quickly. Last summer Heathrow had a disruption due to, I believe it was a software patch of some sort, and so the air traffic control got kind of locked up for a while. Those are just that happens all over the world for a variety of reasons. But it does show you that when we talk about critical infrastructure, not all critical infrastructure is equal. And so, the defense of power sources, of travel, of these IT, sea cables, of security for space-borne communications assets, right? These are all really critical areas.
Yeah, and I think the general public probably isn't fully au fait with how much of their data goes through cables. What's the bandwidth of cables versus, I'm sure a lot of people think everything goes through satellite, but the amount of information on the internet that and all types of communication, whether it's transatlantic, whether it's in the Baltics, whether it's in the Mediterranean, is a huge amount of it is undersea, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think 1,000 years ago, all roads led to Rome.
Yeah.
And today, all data, that cable infrastructure is really vital. And I think some recent disruptions to it have highlighted just how vital it is.
Yeah. So obviously, a lot of these cables are privately owned, but what kind of conversations do you think are happening at a governmental level where, let's assume that Anchor was being dragged intentionally? You've got people loitering around cables. You've got threats on cables. There was some, cables in the Baltics damaged. Where's the conversation going at a governmental level or European level to address this critical infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think, probably the most vital piece of this, again, back to counterterrorism. In counterterrorism, we talk about left of boom and right of boom, right? And the boom is the actual attack. In counterterrorism, you want to not have the boom. So you really want to start focusing efforts on the left side of an attack.
Yeah. So left of is before.
Left of is before. It's a left to right timeline concept. And in cybersecurity, we've started talking about left of breach and right of breach, right? Because a lot of times the cybersecurity effort only focuses left of breach. And then when a crisis happens, the executive team and their support is scrambling for how to recover and be resilient and keep operating in the face of kind of degraded systems. On the counterterrorism front, obviously, like any terrorist attack that would impact human life, liberty, or bad. We don't want that to happen. So a lot of focus on the investigative side, as opposed to, not that forensics isn't important. And I think, given the vitality of these types of cables, given the vitality of energy grid infrastructure and how important it is to all of the facets of life, it's really critical to start looking at the investigative side. And I think that's a lot of focus right now is how do we increase our awareness, regardless of the threat to these key infrastructure nodes, our awareness and ability to warn of an imminent disaster, or take action to deter or disrupt suspicious activity. How could you identify? So on the ships front, how could you start looking for high-risk profile ships? And then you could run a Navy patrol, right? Or you could monitor that ship to see its activities and really take a closer look at it in order to disrupt them from disrupting the cable itself.
So in a way, what you're talking about is left of boom is really in the predictive world. What is going to happen or what risks am I about to encounter? Is that right?
Prediction is a part of it, but it's also, it's facts, right? So it's data driven on, using the Maritime example, this ship has been seen doing suspicious activity in the past. Well, that's a fact. That's not a forecast. This ship is now at this 10-digit military grid reference point on the ocean, which you could say, hey, is that getting too close to critical infrastructure? Yeah. And so I say, yeah, data driven, and I think it's less about prediction and more about data driven risk assessment. And then you can, just like on cyberspace, right? The SOC IT nerds will absolutely understand that you want to prioritize patching. You can't patch everything all the time. Similarly, you want to prioritize your aviation, intelligence and surveillance flights to monitor which areas at what time. So I think that prioritization of how surveillance and defensive surveillance of this critical infrastructure is done can really help prevent some of this. And then, it can also help with increased awareness across all those lines you talked about, private sector, governments, on if there is a disruption, how do you more rapidly recover and be resilient? Having all that data available will help you reroute, will help you look for other resources that can be used to bring things back to a state of normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah, in the past, something like that in terms of offshore surveillance was probably always done by an airplane, or now you're looking at things like whether it's satellite imagery, whether it's AIS, whether it's linking to all the other data sets that a company like Flashpoint have. It's a big challenge for people to layer all these things together and bring them all into a single, common operating picture, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then to learn lessons from it and be able to apply it to future scenarios, right? And I think a misconception, probably not your podcast listeners are probably all sophisticated consumers who understand that like these are often high demand, low density assets to do that type of look. Yeah, I will. So for instance, like satellites don't see all of the planet all the time, and you just click a button and now you see it. A lot of that needs to be
It's a big planet.
Yeah, it's a big planet. It needs to be tasked and directed. You can't see all things all the time. If you're trying to boil the ocean, you're boiling nothing. And so that ability to say this particular geographic area we are concerned about at this moment, and then direct resources. And the low density, high demand piece is, you only have so many aircraft to do aerial surveillance. You only have so many satellites that you can direct at this problem at this time. It's knowing about where to look and when, regardless of if it's space or if it's even digital reconnaissance resources or digital surveillance resources. You can't see the whole internet all the time. And so I think that, the ability to inform prioritization of work through a common operating picture, and that can, like the thing about that operating picture is it needs to be done in real time, which often means it's not going to be on a classified system for a government. It's going to be a system that is interacting with the real world and real digital data in real time.
So it's a lot of public data.
A lot of public data.
In real time. So in a way, it's not too different a challenge to the corporate risk person, at a different scale, a different environment, but they still have to layer lots of data together to get the full common operating picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, in the olden days, in the military, it would have been done with transparency overlays. It would be a map up on a wall, and then you'd have a layer of clear plastic, and you would map out, hey, here's all of the critical infrastructure. And then you would put another layer over and say, here's the history of, threats. And maybe there'd even be another layer on here are resources that can be deployed to recover if there's an attack. And that would be done, by grease pencils and, transparency markers on top of a physical map. And so people are familiar with the work process. They know how to do it. And that was done in a multidisciplinary environment with, experts from these different domains. But I think increasingly, so that the data doesn't have to be ingested and aggregated in one place to create that overlay system, being able to do that with live data in real time really is going to augment the defenders. Like it'll help defensive experts, whether they're government or private sector.
So it's now a right click and adding another map layer instead of a new transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it does, and it also provides the benefit, we haven't talked about AI, so I'm not sure we're on a technology podcast yet.
Yeah.
But it also then, by virtue of being able to use that data and which data sets you want to look at for correlation or for a pattern or anomaly detection, the ability to do that in real time accelerates the speed of response or the speed of decision. And I think that we didn't talk about that speed of decision, but that's a really key driving factor. How quickly can a decision maker, whether they're multinational enterprise or a government leader, ask that question on a specific issue and get a response based on validated data to inform their decision? And that is a piece where work will continue to be needed to be done.
Yeah, and what we always say is the more sources that verify a decision point means that you can have more confidence in your decision, that it's not just one piece of data, but it's backed up by 5 or 6 other sources of data that all point towards the same probable outcome, whether it's a threat is about to happen or whether it's in cyberspace or any other hybrid battle space. But I think that's a great point about how confident you can be in your decisions, because there's a lot of pressure on people to make these decisions quickly, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other component of the confidence in the decision as quickly as possible also then needs to be underlaid by, can I assume that my data is valid? Right? Because there is an massive spike in AI-driven deepfakes. I mean, that deepfakes speak to everybody, but synthetic data sets, right? Spoofing. So there does need to be an ability to validate, verify what data is underlying those conclusions that are delivered. And so back to, kind of back to 1,000 years ago, trust, probably more important. They didn't have digital systems. Human trust is also a key factor in preparation and response to all these activities. Back to why we really like that common floorboards model, because you're getting human beings together. They have coffee, they have bagels, so they do whatever they do. But that then builds a trusted relationship, so you know who to go to. And that can be vital in a crisis.
And Andrew, you talk a lot about open source intelligence, and obviously you need to verify and understand the data quality and understand who's saying things, particularly when you're gathering data online. So it's a really interesting point you brought up there about the deepfakes, the AI generated data that's out on platforms that is designed to send people the wrong direction. What in your experience can people who are consumers of open source intelligence do to think their way through that?
Kind of regular structured analytic techniques are really important. I mean, there's the data procurement side, right? So a question I often ask on the data front is, can you show me the math, right? So things like blockchain illumination, it's great that you show me a conclusion, but can you actually walk through, show us how you got, what was the originating blockchain, what were the data points that got you confirmed on how you started that illumination track? And I think also, particularly for governments, right of breach, right of bang, right of disruption, they're going to probably want to do some sort of, if it was a malicious actor, they're going to want to do a prosecution. So having data that can support evidence in a court system also becomes vital. So it's not just about knowing in advance, it's about what does that do in the whole data life cycle, data ecosystem. That is a question people ask. And I'm not sure all of the consumers have yet thought through the importance of the provenance of the data, chain of custody, and where does it live throughout its life cycle. So these aren't easy things to do.
No, certainly not. And in terms of not easy, let's pivot into the economic and political world, and particularly in Europe, whether it's, trade wars or political fragmentation happening, I presume this is something you keep looking at closely because, threats as they emerge could be hidden in those worlds as well.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the trade and finance. I kind of put that in the trade and financial bucket. We talked briefly on blockchain, revolutionary, but ways to illuminate blockchain transactions are going to be vital. The other piece of it is for governments, especially financial intelligence, and then for financial services firms, how do they ensure that they're not working with a sanctioned entity? Right, you don't want to inadvertently.
Huge issue,
huge issue. You don't want to do international money transfers to a terrorist group or to a banned government. Accidentally, you're doing banking on behalf of North Korea. So that financial intelligence picture, the financial intelligence tradecraft, and it does need to be done in real time because those transactions are requested in real time. And so anti-money laundering, threat finance. We didn't say that as part of our mix of this common floorboards, but that's absolutely a critical aspect of tracing funds.
Excellent. And so if you look at Europe, it feels like, self-sufficiency and sovereignty around these capabilities is a really important issue now, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. And for, again, here in Europe, and I'll include UK, Norway, Switzerland, all of the satellite.
It's not EU.
It's not the EU.
Europe.
It's kind of collectively what is Europe, right? And I think that's a thousands-year-old question. But there are very proud national identities. There are very proud sovereign states within a federal system and within what needs to be a coalition that can work together organically and independent of other global powers. And I think, kind of stronger together is, it's a catchphrase. We used to use it in lots of these kind of task force cells and other places. But if Europe comes together, independent, however it's defined, with this coalition of the willing mindset, then it gives the ability for comparative advantage. So a smaller state like Estonia with really sophisticated cyber defense and really sophisticated digital government capabilities can focus on that. And larger states with, big defense industrial capacity, Germany, probably Poland, increasingly, we'll see what happens in Ukraine, but the Ukraine defense industrial base in non-occupied areas is enormous, really accelerated in the last 3 years. Places like Bulgaria, in Black Sea states, doing production. So I think that we've started the podcast talking about, a need for European security independence and an interest in it. And so I think that model can hold. Because when I've had a lot of conversations around the continent, individual national leaders will say things to me like, yeah, well, the EU has no national security power. We can't do these things. I think the answer is, well, but if you need to do them, maybe there's an alternative model. Right? And so I think I'm pretty optimistic about Europe coming together for public safety, for its own economic defense, and then also, increasingly importantly, military and intelligence unity across this coalition of democratically aligned states. And I think it's pretty inspiring as an example for the rest of the world, too, to be resilient in the face of this.
Yeah, I think the word you said there at the end, resilience, that's what, we see a lot of people across Europe now talking about and investing in, is whether it's cyber resilience, military, maritime, political resilience as well. It's all, when you see threats emerge, it's good to see people actually building resilience, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's all forms of resilience, right? So NATO just published a reference curriculum document through the Partnership for Peace Consortium. So I'll put in a plug for PFPC. But that document on resilience was meant to target not only military and security law enforcement professionals, but also civil society and commercial institutions and academia.
Educational, really.
Right, because there's multiple levels of resilience, just like there's multiple levels of trust. Interpersonal trust. So you have to have interpersonal resilience, inner resilience, community resilience, national resilience, and then really this idea of kind of coalition resilience or market resilience. You can't say the word enough. It's kind of like, what's the first rule in a crisis? Well, it's safety first, always safety first. So safety first and resilience first on the other side of the crisis. And I think that we only benefit when people are focused on the right things.
Fantastic. And just some final thoughts. What are the consequences of not acting?
Well, I think we're seeing the consequences of not acting in real time. Right, we had a disruption to that sea cable in the Baltic Sea. We saw disrupted shipping. You talked about maritime. Red Sea comes to mind as well. So the Houthis acting as a proxy of the Iranian government, that impacted global trade. That impacted North America, impacted Europe, rerouting ships outside the Red Sea.
Yeah, because it's much more expensive to import things from the east all of a sudden.
Absolutely, yeah. And so all of these systems come together. But I'm very optimistic because I think that, it's like everybody was waiting for like a cyber 9/11 to wake up governments and companies to working together on cyber defense. I don't know that we had a cyber 9/11. We've had many huge breaches that never really started bringing things together in a critical way. But I think the events and kind of public awareness of, state and proxy threats to democratic societies has woken a lot of institutions up and private sector actors up to defense and safety.
Yeah, and if I ask you to get out your crystal ball, 2030, 5 years from now, where will we be in Europe?
Well, I can tell you my hope. My personal hope is that Europe does make these investments and that Europe moves away from a percentage of GDP model, which to me has always kind of seemed like, well, it's an allowance. It's like look at the problem that needs to be solved, figure out what those investments are, and then thoughtfully invest in solving the problem. And I mean, that's what we have to do in the private sector, right? You think about CapEx outlays and staffing, and you do discounted present values, and then you figure out where the money comes from to match that with the need. So, 5 years, I think, is long enough to say, if there's advancement on this 800 billion euro package, if the member states invest in it, if we continue to see this alignment on UK and the European continental powers, I think this could be really good for European security, but also, kind of strong fences make strong neighbors make friendly neighbors. So I think everybody wins. North America wins, the Canadians win, the Australians win, but more European unity is better for the world.
Fantastic. You optimistic for the future?
I am optimistic for the future. I am. I see, and not just because of the threats, but values. What are the values that we seek to support and push into the future? And I think things like respect for individual human rights. Again, those democratic principles. Not every democratic government or society needs to look identical. Europe's very good at that, bringing together that kind of diverse mindset. And then also, I don't want to say free trade, but transparent business practices and understood commitment to rule of law. It's very hard to do commerce without trust in the rule of law. And so I think that those universal aligning values, I am optimistic about that because we see a lot of people talking about them.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, Andrew, fantastic conversation. Loved having you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to have you back in a few months' time later on in 2025.
We'll see if Europe got closer together or not.
Yeah. See if you're right or not. Test your predictions, and hopefully they'll all still be left of bank. But Andrew, really appreciate you being here. You've been a great friend to Siren, great friend to myself.
Great work. Thanks for having me.